Morning, David. Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Well, I'm good. Yourself?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. It's, I think, first thing in the morning there, right? For you, last thing at night for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the day is already well started.
Cool. Well, look, we've got a few topics to dig into. Obviously, we know each other a little bit now from the work we're doing together with Carbon for Good, with PlantVillage, with Biochar Life, and want to get into all that groovy stuff around PlantVillage, yourself, the Innovation Lab. Before I do it a disservice, if you can just give us an intro, your background, where you're at, what you do, and we'll get into some of the subjects.
Yeah, so my name is David Hughes. I am the Doherty and Lloyd Hook Chair in Global Food Security at Penn State University. I'm also the director of the USAID Current and Emerging Threats to Crops Innovation Lab, also at Penn State, the founder of PlantVillage, which is a public good coming out of the university to help smallholder farmers grow food under climate change situations, and the founder of a profit for purpose company called Carbon for Good.
Cool. I don't want to go into great detail on every single organization, but I think talking about PlantVillage is a good place to start because it is a huge success story. And obviously we are starting to leverage the technology and, the work you're doing on the ground in Africa. And it's been somewhat of a successful journey over a number of years now in terms of raising money, building out technology, working with, communities in all over the world, but obviously predominantly in Africa that we know. Yeah. How's that journey been? Talk about it today. What's happened?
Yeah, so it came out of my background as an evolutionary biologist studying ants in rainforests around the world. And every time I would come out of a rainforest, I would come into a farm which was destroyed by diseases of the crops. And we've had answers to those diseases for sometimes decades. Cocoa farms in Ghana, for example, really excellent work that was done in the late 70s and 80s helps you control those problems. And the reason those problems are not controlled is a lack of knowledge, a lack of access to local systems called extension services. And this is very wrong. Extension began in my hometown of Dublin in 1846 during the potato famine. And it has been very successful in Europe, North America, South America, China, India, and so on. And it just really hasn't reached Africa at scale in the way it should do. But recognizing that the smartphone is a supercomputer, 1,000,000 times the power of the computer that put man on the moon, and is only going to get better, the idea was born for PlantVillage. How do we put experts in the phone to help smallholder farmers? And that's what we do. So we've been doing this now for 10 years, and we started off with $120,000 in funding, and we have since raised over 33 million, and we're on a path to multiple millions into the future. Because the model is good. The model of providing people knowledge in their locations, which they're able to make decisions. And we do this effectively through smartphones, but also through feature phones, in-person meetings, SMS that we send out across multiple countries, TV and radio. And collectively, across all of those different channels, PlantVillage is reaching about 14 million farmers a week and is planning to reach about 25 million by the end of 2024. And then 100 million by 2030.
Wow, impressive stuff. And, obviously we're on this journey with you now as well in terms of biochar. And, it's great to be able to see some of the work you're doing in terms of learning the value of biochar, what it is. And talk to us a bit about biochar. Why is it so special? What can it do? And, why is it important to these communities as well and the work you're doing with them?
Yeah, it's really impressive. It's sort of, at this stage, it's a case of what it can't do. So the soils in Africa are extremely old. They're older than the dinosaurs. European soils are very young because we've had these ice ages come down. But in Africa, the soils are old and degraded. Biochar increases the pH of the soils by putting it into the ground. So that's immediately beneficial. But it also creates an environment for increased what's called cation ion exchange. So better uptake of nutrients from the roots of the plant into the plant itself. It also increases the microbial diversity in the soil, which allows for more nutrients going to the plants. It increases the water holding capacity of the soil, which is of course critically important because this is helpful both in droughts, but also in these heavy downpours, because the heavy downpours, they leach out the nutrients from the soil. So if the farmer is adding nutrients to the soil, the biochar helps it hold there. The benefit is also beyond the immediate health of the plant, because biochar is now increasingly being shown to cope with some root or soil-borne diseases, so nematodes and bacterial infections. So it's very useful. And we in the current and emerging threats to crops innovation lab are really interested in that. There are people who are using biochar for water filtration, which is a very effective use of it. And you can also use it for evaporative cooling to construct a locally developed zero energy input fridge. So you can take the produce that you've had and you can keep it cool at say 8 degrees Celsius compared to 32 degrees Celsius for a number of weeks, just by putting water over it. So the list case of what you can do with biochar just gets greater and greater. And of course, you do all this while being paid for it as a smallholder farmer through the carbon markets, which is what Biochar Life have been pioneering.
Yeah, and of course, well, it removes carbon, which is the key thing here. And we're hearing biochar a lot more now in the West, where a lot of the money comes from for these credits, for these offsets, for these removal offsets. But it seems like there's a lot more education needed in terms of how important biochar is. And you talked about smallholder farmers there. There's a lot of buzzwords in this industry. One of them, I think, is co-benefits. I say it's a buzzword. For me, it's used a lot, but I don't know if people are using it and really understanding the importance of it. When I hear that co-benefits, that word, I think about the work we do and the fact that, yes, we're about the environment, we're about removing carbon, we're about working with these communities and extending, everything beyond just the carbon removal element. Can you talk a bit more to that, in terms of the social impact, the co-benefits, these farmers that we work with?
Yeah, it's huge. And it's particularly huge because of a number of threats which are coming together. The first is climate change causing either increasing drought or increasing floods. So biochar has the ability to stabilize that field and to reduce that stress. So it de-risks the farmer against droughts, especially. The other is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has amplify the already increasing price of fertilizer across Africa. So now in some places it's 3 times or 4 times what it used to cost. And if you put biochar into the ground, then you can reduce by about 70% the amount of nitrogen fertilizer you need. So it holds the nitrogen in the soil. So you get that cost saving by not losing your crop to drought, and you get the cost saving by the little bit of fertilizer you can use. It goes further and it's used. That's an enormous co-benefit. Then
Yeah.
the other co-benefits, just look at the map of Africa. It's bisected by tropical rainforests. And those soils that Africa has are full of bacteria and nematodes, which will very happily consume your plant as soon as you put it into the ground. And biochar, as we're learning, is a very important protective mechanism for the root zone, and especially against soil-borne diseases. So this is another co-benefit as well. So all of this is de-risking the farmer, and that is beyond what you've just said, which is the first step of giving her money. So
Yeah.
first she gets money, so she's de-risked, but now her crop is de-risked, and this is highly beneficial because the more productivity she gets, the more biomass she has, the more biochar she can get, the more cash she gets, the more biomass you get. And it's just a very virtuous cycle, all of which is owned and operated on her own farm, which is just tremendous.
Yeah. Everything you talk to there is about the science. And one of the questions I was going to ask is about the science. I don't want to ask necessarily for you to repeat it, but I think it's important. And in context here, I'm asking about the science because, in the role that I do, I'm talking to investors, to buyers in this space, and we need more of them to come in and invest in these nature-based solutions in this work on the ground. But often the objection is, how much science is there? What is the science? How much more needs to be done? You're talking real science there, and, how much science do we have and how much more is needed? Or are people just not reading the right papers right now, I suppose?
So a lot of what I'm talking about like the increase in productivity, that's from a meta-analysis of about 1,700 papers showing roughly 42% increase in productivity. Or the water holding capacity, I think it's about 36 papers, and it's about a 27 or 28% increase. So we've gotten to the stage with biochar research that it's not just that we have individual papers which provide evidence or in support of some hypothesis. We've actually got a large body of literature, and there's really some great people out there who've summarized this, even to the stage of summarizing it in books. Kathleen Draper's book, for example, is a really nice example of this. So there's really good consensus that biochar increases the health of the soil, promotes diversity of microbes, reduces plant pathogens, increases the water holding capacity, and also reduces soil erosion and makes your fertilizer go further. So lots of evidence there. So then to your essential question is that why are people saying it's not good? Well, I think we have to examine what is their incentive structure. Because if you have a large body of science over the last 15, 20 years, which showed the benefit of this, and it's not generally adopted, maybe it's not being adopted because the people who are saying it's not useful, it doesn't fit into their economic framework. So we're seeing in carbon dioxide removal a lot of venture capital coming in, a lot of frothy behavior in the markets, everybody talking about big machines in Iceland, they could suck out all the carbon and save the world. Maybe. Certainly not tomorrow. But how long is it going to take before we get there? And I think it's in their incentive structure to say what we're doing in Africa is actually not beneficial to their long-term business plans. So we have to be clear about what are we trying to optimize. Firstly, we're trying to optimize the removal of carbon dioxide at scale. Then clearly biochar is the leading benefit, because we know that 75% of it forms this polyaromatic carbon pool. It's a recalcitrant form. It has a 1,000-year duration. So let's turn biomass to biochar today and tomorrow. And then the second thing is let's build up a system whereby the people are benefiting because the extra income allows them to grow more food. Recognizing that for the last 5 years, we've had increasing food insecurity, and we need to turn the tide on this, or else we'll see massive, massive problems. So I think it's all about incentive structures, as is everything in the world. If your motivation is to help smallholder farmers and the planet, biochar is the way to go.
And what kind of capacity do we have in these areas? I think we're just scratching the surface, right? Excuse the pun, in terms of what is available, right?
Yeah, I mean, I often show this map of Africa where you can fit in Europe and China and the US. It's absolutely enormous, and there's maybe 300 or 400 million smallholder farmers. In some countries, farming is a predominant activity, and all of these are smallholder farmers. So maybe half an acre, 1 acre, or 2 acres, so really small. But it doesn't matter because they all have the potential to capture and store carbon on their field. So in our case, PlantVillage, we've developed this idea of the carbon capture cube, which is what we won the X Prize milestone prize for. So we can think of these 1 acre farms as a cube where you can grow food, and then the biomass from the non-consumed part goes into biochar and it's stored in the soil. No transportation costs, no movement. And you take that single cube and you multiply it by 50 million, 100 million. And it's absolutely possible to capture and store carbon at scale because these people are already capturing carbon. It's called growing food. Now we need to put it into the ground in a virtuous cycle that allows them to grow more food.
I think sometimes, people hear us talking about these communities, talking about this work, and, you've spent time on the ground in Africa. What are some of the challenges and what are the perceptions at the community level? Are they as excited? Are there challenges? Is there a big education piece needed, or do they, also kind of see the excitement here?
I think they see the excitement immediately. It's really surprising. We've tried a wide range of different things and seeing what resonates with farmers and how they respond. Biochar is just a number one thing they respond to. They know they can make it locally. They know that if they add it to the soil, they immediately see the soil being black. And if you live in a world of red soil which is dry and falls out of your fingers, and now you're building up the quality through biochar. You see that. You immediately see that. And then they see the crops growing effectively under that. So when we've been doing this large study as part of our innovation lab, after we finished, the farmers came and demanded that we would keep on coming and providing them the training. And one example was Mercy Suma, one of our leads in Eastern Kenya. She was really pulled back into the farm to do that. And so now they're copying it, they're doing it, they're doing it independently in Tanzania and Nepal and Kenya and elsewhere, and Burkina Faso, where we have operations. And it's really impressive to see the extent to which this is resonating, because what people want in a world of climate change is control. And if you can control the soil quality by taking the material you're not going to eat and turning that into something useful, or taking weeds. So we have this large project in Kenya where we're taking this invasive weed called mesquite, Prosopis judiflora, which is really bad for the environment and the pastoralist system. And we're turning that into biochar. People immediately see the benefit. Here we have the weed, it's gone. Oh, now we have biochar, great. The biochar is in the soil. Oh, the grasses are growing really well, and the animals feed on the grasses. All of this happens in 2 months. And so it's not some far off plan of in the future will be better if we make sacrifices. It's something people can control today, and that's why they really, really like it.
Yeah, I think for me, that's one of the key points. It's just the ability to execute on this stuff right now. I mean, we're talking kind of weeks, not years, in terms of the impact, right? I mean, if someone funds one of these projects, you can have, farmers trained, creating biochar, mixing it with their soil, and see the yield difference within a season, right? I mean, that's the point here. It's such a fast turnaround in terms of the impact.
I often think of it like firefighting. Firefighters come to a house, it's on fire, they take out the hose, they use the water. And a lot of what we're talking about in international development is how do we design better fire retardant materials? How do we design a house so it doesn't burn down so quickly? Or how do we have, faster engines or bigger pipes or whatever's the case? We speak about all of this at a time. But fundamentally, when the house is on fire, you need water.
Yeah.
And the same thing is happening in poor, degraded African soils. We need biochar. And not only because of the benefits I've talked about, but also the fact that it brings in income. It's a massive immediate change. And so really, we really are in a firefighting, as Greta Thunberg would say, that your house is on fire. And biochar is an incredibly important first line defense that we should scale up today.
Cool. I know the other piece here is visibility into a lot of this work, right? And you talked at the beginning about the adoption of smartphones and which is amazing. The connections you've got with that bigger community across Africa. But as we talk to individuals investing in credits and funders coming in, one of the key things they want is to be able to see what's going on the ground. I may even share actually on this podcast some screens. I won't get you to do it now, but I can, for people that are watching. But I've seen some of the work you're doing with the with the app. Do you want to just talk through some of the visibility people can have into the work on the ground when they're investing in these programs?
Yeah, I think the issue is really all about transparency. And what we've been able to do in PlantVillage is leverage our 5-year history with the United Nations, the Food and Agricultural Organization, where we were helping them understand where is a particular threat, like locusts. And there you need to know the time the locusts were there and the precise location. And so we built all these tools in the app and connecting to satellites, even in remote locations like the Sahara Desert. Okay, so we take all of that and we apply it to biochar. So the fundamentally important thing is, where was it made, what time of day, and what is the geolocation, and were all the steps taken? So did you have the preparation of the biochar before you put it into the Kontiki kiln? Did you afterwards cool it down? Was it mixed with a manure? Was it put into the ground? Was the farmer paid? All of the steps, which are important. Now critically, they're all geotagged and time stamped. So we have the sequence. So now any future buyer can see, yes, Evelyn Wafula, one of our lead farmers, she can make it this day. She's done all those steps. And now I can see that somebody outside of PlantVillage, like Ohm, who's on Biochar Life's team, she can look at the platform and verify it. And then it can go to another group who can also look at it, for example, and ultimately to the end buyer. So if I was an end buyer at a company, I would have 10,000 records, and I could randomly choose any of these records to verify it all happened. The important thing also is the data stays on the public database at the university. So PlantVillage is at Penn State. Now, not the name of the farmer or her phone number, but the fact that a farmer in this area did these steps. And the data will be free and available so that a global community of scientists can look at, for example, the soil chemistry and how the farmer is adding it, or what's changing in the biomass over time, etc. Because having a global bunch of scientists in the community analyze this data is a check and balance that's really important and critical. And that's how we're managing to have, for example, COVID vaccines, because all of the genetic data is public. And so that's the approach that we're taking as a university, working with the private sector like Biochar Life, in order to make this happen. Because it is absolutely true. It's a lack of trust, and the only way to have trust is to give all the information all the time to everyone. And
Awesome.
Therefore, we don't have any issues about this.
Awesome. So, I mean, over the, who knows, 10 years from now, the amount that people will be able to learn from all this data that's there in open source, and other scientists will be able to get access and hopefully learn a huge amount from that data.
And there's lots of things we have to consider. For example, we want to remove carbon, but in the process of removing carbon, we're taking biomass and we're turning it into biochar via pyrolysis. We're also going to be removing other important compounds like phosphorus. So will we upset the phosphorus cycle? Or if we add all of this biochar, will we have some unintended consequences 5 years into the future? For example, changing the composition of a certain type of nematode in the soil. And that may not seem bad, but it could actually turn out to be very bad. There's lots of things that we have to continuously test. So if I was a future ecologist, I would go to a location, sample for this nematode or earthworm or whatever, and then I would be able to use the historical data, 5 years of it, on the biochar and say, oh, biochar is driving the decline of this, for example. These are the kind of things, or promoting the increase, whatever's the case. But we need to have scientists doing what scientists do, which is figure out how the world works. And since we're doing this geoengineering project, that's what we want to engage them on.
Awesome. Let's talk funding a little bit. We talk science. I think in terms of the effort of what's needed, individuals need to make a difference. We all know daily how we can do our own little thing. Businesses, as we know, are investing. Not everyone's, on board, but we're certainly moving in the right direction, I hope. Government, I think, is the question mark, and I'm interested to hear your perspective. I think particularly from someone sitting in the US. I mean, what do you see the role of government in the future as we kind of head to 2030 in terms of investment? Are we going to need government money? Is it not that simple? What are your kind of views on the government support that's needed in this sector in terms of kind of meeting the targets that we need to meet?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I was really inspired by a recent meeting through the Aim for Climate initiative, which we're part of. It started in COP26. And it's a large effort between the United States and the United Arab Emirates, but now 40 countries, I think, are involved. They've pulled in about $13 billion in commitment. And the idea is to leverage the land, the agricultural land, in order to combat climate change. And, in a lot of ways, that's thinking about soil capturing carbon through natural processes. But of course, biochar is critically important in that regard as well. And when you see the energy in the room trying to move towards that and the deep pockets of government, then it strikes me that what government could do very effectively here is both capture and store carbon at scale, as well as help smallholder farmers. Yeah. So that might be a way in which they think. For example, what we're doing, we've had money from USAID and hopefully then Burkina Faso, so two of the missions in those countries. And there's a problem in both countries, weeds and infected material of bananas or whatever. And we can turn the infected material into biochar, improve the soil, And so we're solving three problems at once: the infected material, the soil quality, and supplementary income to the farmers as they have to grow something else. And so this triple win, also a fourth win is that we're employing young people to do this. So reducing unemployment. It all just seems like an obvious thing that government can get behind. And I think that's a really advantageous position for pro-social companies like Biochar Life or Carbon for Good, whose mission it is to help the smallholder farmer. And government could see, by investing in those companies, paying for services, you're helping the smallholder farmer cope with a variety of stresses. So I think government is going to be huge, increasingly so. And our job is to provide them smart and effective solutions where their investment dollars go, not just 3 times further, but maybe 10 or 20 times further.
Do you think the role of the corporate sector is different? I mean, in some ways, there's quite a bit of overlap, right? But it's maybe naive to just see the corporate sector as a kind of funding body. But I know you've, particularly with PlantVillage, have done extremely well in terms of growing that through relationships with corporates. But do you see the role of the corporate sector as independent or overlapping, really?
I think as a buyer, they're obviously critically important. If we can effectively educate them such that they understand that the carbon is removed immediately, stored for 1,000 years, but also these massive benefits to the community, that should be strongly impactful for their stakeholders, shareholders, or customers, or whatever's the case. I think that's one way in which the corporate sector is going to be really important. The other way is lessons from business. If we want to get to a gigaton, that's a huge amount of carbon to pull down and draw in. And so we need a sort of business approach that, for example, Airbnb or Uber or these large platforms have pushed. In our case, we have been funded by Eric Schmidt back in 2019, former Google CEO Eric and Wendy Schmidt, Schmidt Futures. And that came with professional training in objectives and key results. So scaling up the professional structure is also a very effective way in which we can benefit from corporations. So they're buyers, and they're also they gives instructions on how to effectively do things. But increasingly also from this Aim for Climate event, I also saw that government, especially the United States government, really wants to see this public-private partnership, and they want to do it in a meaningful way. I think post-COVID, we want to make sure it's not just lipstick on a pig. It's actually something really, really useful that we're seeing this making a difference properly in the short term for people who are most affected.
You mentioned a gigaton there. It's maybe a good segue to my last question. Are you optimistic? And if you are, or if you're not, what makes you optimistic? What do we need to do to get there? How do we all come together to make sure we can get to where we need to get to over the next kind of decade?
I'm very optimistic because I think we have most elements solved. We have access to vast amounts of land in the global south, which is across the equator, which is being used for farms. And now, if we increase the amount of food that those farms grow, we can increase the amount of carbon it captures. We don't have to take farms and turn them to forests. We use existing farms and we just make them into these, powerful carbon capture cubes. The other thing is that the people on those farms desperately need more food and more income. And the mechanism that we're doing is providing both. So we're growing more food. The issue of connecting with them is easy. So we have these PlantVillage Dream Team members. We have TV, we radio, phones, SMS, etc. So connecting is actually easy and cheap. We can do this effectively. And the other element is that the international community is going to recognize that 1,000-year duration carbon is fine. And putting carbon in soil in Malawi or Kenya or Burkina Faso is so much better than putting in a rock in Iceland or in the Midwest of America, drilling it into a hole like Charm Industrial is doing. Because the day you put that carbon into the soil is the day it starts changing the lives of the people on the planet most affected by climate change. And this is what's the key important message. So I'm really optimistic. We're also partnering with really interesting groups like All Power Labs in Berkeley, where we could look at how we can use biochar production today with the Kontiki kilns, which is very simple. But we could also go to a system whereby we are using the biomass to create electricity and heat as well as biochar. So now we could have renewable energy on a microgrid system spread out across all these communities. And we can have, eventually 10 million of these, and they don't cost that much money. And again, we need to have Africa moving towards the light, having heat, having energy, without using fossil fuels. And biochar is the way to get there. Biomass production of renewable energies is the way. And again, it's Africa. The equator goes right through it. So we can grow a huge amount of food there and increase biomass productivity. So that's why I'm optimistic.
Cool. Well, I'm also optimistic and obviously somewhat biased because I completely agree with you on the 1,000 years and the biochar as a solution. And exciting stuff with the All Power Labs stuff, which I've obviously seen as well. I mean, that kind of technology is extremely exciting in terms of what you can do in developing countries and having a multi-purpose solution. So I didn't have any more questions unless there's anything I didn't ask that you'd like to say. Otherwise, I'll get you to kind of share your details with the audience.
No, it's a work in progress. I would say people have to be open to new ways of doing things. In our case, I think what the globe is looking at is big technological solutions, and what they really should look at is that carbon dioxide capture is a surface area problem. It has been for the 400 million years or so in which we've had land plants doing their business, and surface area is maximized across the equator, and doubling down on smallholder farmers is very, very effective. Now, people would say, oh, but it's Africa, we can't do this. When people looked at this spare bedroom in your house, no one ever imagined the largest hotel system in the world. But that's where Airbnb is. Or when they looked at all these cars sitting on the side of the streets, no one imagined the largest taxi firm in the world. But that's where Uber is. So we can look at African farms thinking they're a problem, but understanding they're a solution. And this can be the largest carbon capture factory in the world. And it can be and that can happen in 5 years' time.
Cool. I love the Uber and the Airbnb comparisons. I think it makes a lot of sense. So, look, if people want to learn more, get hold of yourself. About the organisations that you're involved with. Do you want to just share some details? And I'll also put them in the speaker notes for anyone watching or listening.
Yep. So just Google David Hughes at Penn State or David Hughes PlantVillage. It's plantvillage.psu.edu, carbonforgood.net. Also the Innovation Lab, plantvillage.psu.edu/CETCIL. Yeah, you'll find me. I'm around. I'm annoyingly so around everywhere. So
cool.
Reach out and also reach out to the broader community of PlantVillage. We're over 300 people now. So please reach out and engage us. It takes a village, and we need as many people focus on this critically important problem as possible. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Thanks a lot for giving up your time this morning. And thanks everyone for listening and watching. And I'll leave all those details in the notes. So I shall leave it to you today, David. Thank you.
Great. Cheers. Thank you so much indeed. Take it easy.